great.
I'm watching
And
on my end. So,
folks, as a matter of housekeeping, I know that some folks will have to arrive a little late. Some folks will need to leave a little early. We certainly appreciate you for whatever length of time that you are available to be here with us today. And then in terms of camera on, camera off, we welcome you to do whatever makes sense. There is going to be some discussion, I would say, in the second half of our agenda today. We are going to have a really wonderful interactive discussion presentation with a peer and colleague of ours, Dr. Sherry Killen-Stewart. And we're really grateful for her being here today. So she'll lead us through that. And so I would say if there's a time to get ready for camera on and be thinking about unmuting your mic, that'll be the time for that. We'll have a few other places in the agenda where that makes some sense too. I see we've got Governor and First Lady have joined us. Welcome to both of you. Nice to see your faces. And Andrea, how we doing? Are we ready to rock?
I have the same question for Chris. It's streaming the audio, but the video is not streaming quite yet, but yep. Chris is working on it.
I'm looking into it.
Okay.
But I think we can go ahead with audio. We don't really have anything to look at the moment.
Okay. And let's see. I'm just trying to minimize. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to exit my full screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then in terms of today's meeting, I know there are a number of folks who are serving as a surrogate for their agency today. This might be your first meeting, so we want to welcome you. We are not going to do a roll call. We're just going to use the RSVPs and the who we can see on the screen to sort of determine who's here today. If you want to go ahead, if you're calling in from a different number or you want to make sure we know you're there, go ahead and send us a message in the chat and let us know who you are and who you might be representing or which agency you're representing today. So I'm Emily Amundsen. I have the pleasure of serving as the secretary at the Department of Children and Families. And again, this is just one of my favorite meetings. Very excited to be with all of you this morning. So I want to give you just a little bit of a recap and an introduction to start out this morning. And then we have a couple of matters of business, and then we'll have the opportunity to hear from the governor a little bit about the kind of big picture when it comes to supporting families, supporting kids here in the state of Wisconsin through some of the decisions that he made as part of the executive budget making process. And then again, in our second hour, the opportunity to really hear about some exciting ways of thinking about equity as it relates to the early childhood sector, but broader than early childhood. And that's really one of the main goals of this Leadership Council on Early Years. This is an interagency committee that's comprised of state leaders who direct the work of the agencies to promote coherence across that birth to 5 space. So that includes early care and education. It includes family services, and it frankly includes anything that makes it easier to live and exist and thrive in a family or as part of a community. And so I really want you to kind of think broadly about what's on the table in these conversations as part of the LCEY meeting. So as agency leaders, you're in a position to set the strategic vision and priorities for your agency. Cabinet leaders, executive leadership, charged with carrying out the governor's vision. And your leadership as part of the way we're thinking about supporting kids and families is critical to our collective success as a state. And that's really the theory of action for this Leadership Council on Early Years. We want to engage agencies whose main function is to provide services to children. So, obviously our agency, the Department of Public Instruction is here, the Office of Children's Mental Health is here. That makes a lot of sense, right? but also agencies like WEDC and DWD and WEDA and DOC and DATCAP were part of the way that we wanted to build a bigger table around early childhood, around supporting kids and families. And to my delight, after we put this council together, other agencies who we first assumed would have less of a stake in this conversation actually reached out to us and said, hey, did my invite get lost in the mail? Like, I want to have this conversation. I want to talk about kids and families. I have a lot to say. And honestly, some of the most creative and valuable connections in the last year have come out of some of those places where we didn't think there was a lot of connection to be had. So that's my sort of preface to say we all have a role in helping kids and families thrive. And our collaboration, I believe, is going to be critical to advancing this governor's bold early childhood agenda. And, you know, broader than that, an agenda that really supports families. So if this is your first meeting, again, I want to thank you for being here, but I also want to invite you to wear multiple hats in some of the discussions that we'll have today. I want you to think about this from your agency's perspective, right? And the pieces of your agency's budget that might relate to supporting children and families and communities in that equity frame. I also want you to think about what you've heard and what you know about your stakeholders and their families. What have you heard in the last year that they need to be successful, to get back on their feet after a difficult year? What have you heard about the supports that they need that contribute to their overall well-being of their family, of their kids? I want you to think about your own agency workforce and their needs. What are the flexibilities that you've used as a leader over the past year to ensure that your employees can balance work life and family responsibilities without compromising the quality and the efficiency that you know our agencies are based on? And then, of course, I want you to think about the experiences you've had with your own family or your own extended family. What experiences have you had that really inform this conversation? So really invite you to think through all of those lenses and to speak from all of those perspectives as we get into discussion today. The other thing about Leadership Council on Early Years, LCEY, it's a critical part of Wisconsin's preschool development grant. And this is something you're going to be hearing a little bit more about. We really wrote this council into the infrastructure of Wisconsin's PDG grant. And since our last meeting, we've been awarded $30 million over the next 3 years to implement our plan. And this was a plan that we really used LCEY in our first year to sort of vet and gut check pieces of that plan. So this investment around the preschool development grant is coming at an absolutely critical time for the early childcare or early childhood sector. We're facing the devastating impact of COVID on the childcare industry. I know all of you have heard a lot about that, but it's also a time of opportunity. And we're seeing childcare finally getting that elevated sort of voice and being recognized as a foundational sector, as a backbone sector in communities. So we feel like this is a really pivotal moment for us. To date, this council has met twice. Once about a year ago, back in February of 2020, one of the last in-person meetings that I remember, where we were in Milwaukee at United Community Center. And we saw firsthand some of the opportunities that are afoot to be able to wrap services, programs, and funding streams around children and families to provide holistic services for children's, for adults, for elders in the community, and really inspired by sort of how their vision of the pieces fit together. Our second meeting was a virtual meeting that we held in September of 2020, and we featured our colleagues from DWD, from WEDC, and from the Office of Children's Mental Health, demonstrating childcare's connection to workforce, to economic development, and to family supports. So looking ahead this year, we'd love for you to save a few dates on your calendar, either you or another member of your leadership team. We're looking at mid-April, April 21st, a conversation squarely focused on economic development. We're looking at trying to bring some business leaders in to have some discussions there. Tuesday, July 20th, we're looking at a conversation focused on workforce, really thinking about the folks that work every day with our littlest Wisconsinites. And then later in the year, September 30th, a conversation with parents and families and what they need to feel successful and supported here in Wisconsin. So today, this February, actually every February, we're celebrating Black History Month. And today we've got a really great conversation that is focused on equity. And so it feels like an appropriate time to really recognize the 45th year of Black History Month. Every year, a theme is chosen for Black History Month. This year's theme is the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. And I can't think of a better frame for our conversation today. In the DCF items in the governor's budget, an overarching theme is to uplift and support the whole family. And in childcare, equity and inclusion must be at the forefront of decision-making in the areas of quality, of access, of affordability, of workforce development, and supporting Black families, Black parents, Black caregivers and childcare teachers and workers, helping to provide representation, embracing diversity, and highlighting the identity and experiences of Black families is something that gives me a lot of joy this month. It's something that I know we have childcare centers and child organizations that have done such great work in this field. And again, today, really spending some time thinking about the 0 to 5 space, supporting kids and families with that focus on equity. As I mentioned, equity is absolutely central to the preschool development grant. But more importantly, it is central to this governor's vision and really drives him. And I believe it's what gets him up in the morning. I'll let him tell you that though. I think we'll share the work of advancing equity within the PDG, and then we'll have a discussion about how each of our agencies contribute to the work of addressing inequities that persist here in the state. Tomorrow, we have our first meeting of the Governor's Equity and Inclusion Advisory Committee, and I'm very excited to be a member of that council. DCF also sits on the Governor's Health Equity Council. DFI and OCI are leading a newly reformed council on financial literacy and capability that's also more focused on that equity frame. There's a lot going on in this space. And so really taking the time to surface the places where equity becomes a driver for our work to, again, support kids and families is something I'm really interested in exploring today and continuing to explore in the way that we talk about this budget. For me, it's top of mind how we think about cross-pollinating equity conversations so that folks external of our agencies understand how we're doing the equity work, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but like, how are we showing that we're walking the walk? So this is something that I'm trying to get better at, and I think it's an opportunity through this budget to drive a conversation about walking the walk. So in doing the equity work, one of the things that DCF really holds dear is that we're trying to build a bigger table always, and we're always trying to pull up more chairs to ensure that folks from communities of color and folks with diverse perspectives have their voices heard, have their ideas considered early and often, and are absolutely knit into our process as fidelity testers of the work that we're doing. So to that end, we're launching as part of our preschool development grant this year, the Early Childhood Equity Advisory Council through the Preschool Development Grant and the Wisconsin Infant Toddler Policy Project. This is something we're really excited about, and again, another effort we're making to try to make our equity work more visible and accessible to the folks that we're privileged to work with every day. Lastly, sort of up ahead of some meeting minutes actions, I want to remind folks, we sent out a video by Dr. Rosemary Allen on the importance of equity in early care and education. And I just wanted to sort of be in the room with many of you as you watch this video, because I'm assuming that, you know, with a video that was focused so squarely on expulsion and suspension issues nationally, also very prevalent in the state of Wisconsin, again, on our littlest learners, and the disproportionate suspension and expulsion of children of color, again, here in Wisconsin and across the country. I'm sure many of you were surprised to learn that this is a practice that exists in our child care centers. I think it's important to acknowledge that racism and systems of inequity don't just appear when kids hit the K-12 system. It's present in the earliest days of learning, and it has long-term huge impacts on their well-being, as we saw in that video. But we know what we can do to address it. And I'm so proud in this governor's budget, the investment in expanding training for social emotional learning in Wisconsin, so that our early care and education educators can build a better system of support for all learners in Wisconsin. I want to really acknowledge the First Lady's efforts in bringing attention to spotlighting the benefits of social emotional learning for young learners, and also really highlighting the short and long-term benefits that these programs can have, both on the learners, but also on the system. Also want to just provide some thanks to Linda Hall and her team from the Office of Children's Mental Health for supporting that work over the last year. And again, bringing the spotlight and visibility, it made such a difference. So that was a lot. I feel like I had a lot to say. It's been 6 months. And so really grateful again for everybody's time here this morning, and also just your commitment to showing up for kids and families, for pushing us into this equity space. There are so many folks on this call today that that I consider equity leaders in this in across state agencies, and so really appreciative of your participation in the conversation today. Before I pass the baton to our governor, I have just one piece of business. We have some meeting minutes to approve. So in your packets that you were sent out, there are two sets of draft meeting minutes. So I'm going to need folks to take a brief look at first the February 26th meeting minutes. And I'll give you just a second to, hopefully you've taken a look. And I'm just going to need somebody to come off mute and move to approve the February 26th, 2020 meeting minutes.
I'd be happy to do that, Emily.
Yes.
I'll second. This is Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. And who is my person who moved?
I thought
Linda Hall.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, and I would just ask you to come off mute, and I will ask all in favor.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then same thing for our September 16th, 2020 meeting minutes. Could I ask somebody to move to approve those minutes, please?
This is Rebecca. I can move for the September meeting minutes to approve those.
Thank you, Rebecca. And can I have a second, please?
This is Randy. I'll second.
Thank you, Randy. Great. And all in favor of approving those minutes?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Appreciate it. All opposed? All right, motion carries. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. And now I am very excited to introduce our governor, Tony Evers, to introduce any thoughts and comments that he has on early childhood investments, or frankly, anything else you want to say, Governor.
All right. Thanks so much for the introduction, Secretary Amundsen, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here today to discuss a really important part of our lives across government. I'm a firm believer in connecting the dots across government. For those of you who hear me occasionally, you know I say it all the time. In fact, I was sitting in a car with President Biden the other day, and I used it 2 or 3 times without knowing. After I was headed home, I thought, God, I used connecting the dots with the president too. So I guess it's stuck there, and it'll stay there. But it is foundational on how we get our job done. Frankly, we know how important it is to connect those dots. This group and our response to the pandemic when it came to childcare and our kids is a testament to that fact. This strategy sets us up to take the next step through the 2021-23 state budget. This week, I introduced my Badger bounce back plan that puts Wisconsin in the best position to bounce back and better from the pandemic. I don't have to tell you this, but early care and education is a major player in that bounce back. Not only supporting our providers and educators and setting our kids up for future success, but also ensuring that working parents and caregivers can find affordable, quality childcare so they can head off to work. That's why our Badger Bounce Back agenda includes a historic state investment in early care and education workforce and the system also through the Child Care Strong program, ensuring quality, affordable, accessible, and equitable child care in every family. We're also expanding the 53206 initiatives to the adjacent zip codes, investing more than $3 million in social and emotional training and technical assistance, providing a $500,000 annual TANF increase for the reward program for child care workers, and allowing individuals to use FMLA when their child care provider is closed. While we're excited about all these major investments in our kids and families, we are far, far, far from the finish line. This is sure to be a tough budget process, but I believe that we can get some really great things done for our families, communities, and state. So folks, we need your help to do that. That's the bottom line. We need you to get plugged into this budget, connect with your networks of advocates, and let's get it done for our state, but most importantly for our kids. Once again, thank you for being here. Looking forward to our discussion today and moving our state forward to a much better future.
Thank you, Governor. And now I'll invite my friend and colleague Nadia Perez-Reyes from DCF to talk just a little bit more about a couple of the DCF pieces of the executive budget that we really want folks to know and understand. And again, we're looking for those places to connect the dots. And just to echo what the governor just said, it's about tapping into your networks. I know because so many of you have told me that in conversations with your stakeholders, childcare comes up. I want you to be able to tell them about Childcare Strong. I want you to be able to tell them why the federal money that we've received as part of the coronavirus relief is not enough to stabilize this state and the state of things in childcare. So I'm really calling on you to help me be ambassadors of this piece of the childcare puzzle. So with that, Nadia.
Good morning, everyone. As the governor mentioned, we are really excited about this budget and what it does for our early care and education folks. So we're just going to do a little bit of chatting, just give a high-level overview of some of our budget items that are in this year's biennial budget. So there are 3 areas that I want to highlight, and that is how the funding fits into a framework of equity and sustainability, the importance of equity in educating our kids and supporting Wisconsin's families. And also, we are going to throw a shout out to the governor for an unprecedented investment in early care and education in this budget. And that will take us into the 3 big planks around early care and education. The first one is investing in the early care and education workforce and infrastructure. Some of you may have heard over the past week about Childcare Strong. And Childcare Strong is a $106 million new investment of funding for a total of $140 million that targets the reduction of the high cost of infant and toddler care. It also lifts the wages of the early care and education workforce so that we can retain that top talent in our childcare programs. We are also transferring Head Start to DCF and also that supplement. So DCF will be set up as a one-stop shop for all of early care and education in Wisconsin. We are also improving customer service at the Milwaukee Early Care Administration, and that is our single largest authorizer for Wisconsin Shares and interface with families in Milwaukee County. Second, we are expanding evidence-based programs. So there is a reward salary supplement expansion of $500,000 in each year, which will allow for increased wages for our early care and education workforce. The 53206 initiative from the last budget will be expanded to adjacent zip codes. We have a $3 million social emotional learning program investment, which was a recommendation of the Early Childhood Advisory Council. And then we also have the Be Great Graduate program, which would expand to 2 new Boys and Girls Clubs to serve kids throughout our state. And third, we would increase access and support for vulnerable families. So there are 4 different tracks in here. We would deduct child support payments when considering eligibility for Wisconsin Shares. There would be an earnings disregard for direct care workers, which would hopefully increase the eligibility for use of the child care subsidy program, Wisconsin Shares. There is a non-refundable credit for child care expenses, and also FMLA leave would be allowed for child care closures. So just really, really great things that we're seeing in, the childcare space. And then I just want to talk briefly about 2 related items that I think are top of mind for people in the early care and education space. And one is the increase in Wisconsin Shares reimbursement rate. So we experienced an underspend due to lack of participation in Shares, with just all of the different ebbs and flows that happen with people being home, people going back to work. And so after listening to providers and checking figures, we were able to boost rates by 21% for the rest of the fiscal year through June 30th of 2021, which is just a really great way for us to invest in kids, in families, and in our childcare programs throughout the state. And then we also had an investment from the federal government on additional CCDBG dollars, that's Child Care Development Block Grant money from the second federal COVID legislation. So we continue to work through the challenges in how we secure authority to spend the additional funds that we have received in that package for Wisconsin. But we view these dollars as a short to medium term stopgap to make sure that our early care and education system is healthy in the wake of the pandemic. And we hope to provide more information and updates very, very soon. So thank you.
Nadia, can I put you on the spot, or potentially Aaron, for a second, and just ask the question that I'm hoping might be on people's minds, and it was one that I teed up a little bit earlier, which is why would we be making such an aggressive ask in the governor's budget around that Child Care Strong program on the heels of receiving this one-time money in coronavirus relief? Can you just help explain sort of the difference in those 2 strategies, either Aaron or Nadia?
So I was going to answer, but I saw Aaron came off of mute, so I know that she is chomping at the bit to answer this question. So Aaron, go for it.
Sure. So when we think about our funding, we have a number of buckets. The first one is immediate relief. We know that our childcare providers need that immediate relief. They are running under capacity, so at about 50%. There are still things that they have to pay for, even though they're running at such a low capacity. It is difficult to recruit and retain high quality staff. They are having to do additional safety and health and safety measures and purchasing PPE and other things. So The immediate relief, those funds that are coming right now from the feds are used for that particular purpose, to ensure that we are right now having safe and healthy programs for our children and for our families. That's the immediate relief side. There's also a side where we know that historically, well before this healthcare pandemic, and quite frankly after, we have been in crisis. We have significant childcare deserts across our state. Childcare providers, they run on razor thin margins. We have seen a decline over the years in childcare, and quite frankly, childcare is the infrastructure to our economy. And so what's happening is we need to invest in a sustainable system and infrastructure in order to be able to do a couple of things. One, ensure that we have providers and childcare programs becoming regulated, so we know they are safe, so we know that they are of quality. Two, we want to make sure that we are focusing on infants and toddlers, and so we need to increase our funding for them, as they are, although we're running on razor thin margins, it's expensive to take care of our littlest ones, and quite frankly, really the most important work. We also know that this package that we have, Child Care Strong, focuses on our workforce so that we can, again, recruit and retain and build this strong structure so that after these relief funds, so in the future, we have a strong system that, again, is the infrastructure for our workforce. Folks need to return to work. We need a strong economy. And this is really the sustainable infrastructure that is needed well beyond our time in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And so that's why this investment is critical.
Thanks, Erin. It's almost like you practiced that answer. That's good. I just want to ask, does anybody have a question for either Erin or Nadia on sort of the finer points of the childcare specific piece of the budget, or any comments about intersecting governor's exec budget proposals that you think would help buoy or bolster the story we're trying to tell around supporting kids and families?
Emily, this is Peter Barca, and I'm curious for those centers that care for children with disabilities, if we have any special provisions there. I know in the Kenosha Racine area, we have a couple facilities that I've been very close to over the years, and I know you've taken a special interest, as a secretary, but I'm just wondering, is there anything in the budget specific to those types of facilities?
Erin, do you want to take a minute on this one?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. So I have to just share my background as an early childhood special ed, so a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And one of the things that we've been looking at as we are developing Child Care Strong, and as we've quite frankly thought about our child care counts, which is our program to focus on immediate relief, we have had add-on. We know it's expensive, and there's a different type of, oftentimes a more comprehensive type of care that's needed. So we have added on additional funds for children with disabilities. That's something that's important, that's needed, that we've heard from stakeholders time and time again. In addition to children with disabilities, we've also added on additional funding for children who are multilingual learners. Again, an important piece when we think about our vulnerable populations. And so I want to just say that there's this immediate piece of child care counts that focuses here, but this long-term investment. And in this long-term investment, we need to focus on how we supporting our providers to then support our children, that they're taking care of children with disabilities. What does that mean? And how do we look at funding in a way to provide that comprehensive support? So it is on the forefront of our minds 100%. There's so many other ways that we're tackling this as well. I want to be honest, through other, I'll be frank, from our preschool development grant work in other areas as well. So I thank you for bringing it up, because I think it's really, really critical to look at.
Thanks, Peter.
And then Emily, if you don't mind, one last thing is, in terms of the connecting of the dots, the Wisconsin Institute for the CPA, they're one of our biggest stakeholder groups, and we'll be speaking to them sometime in the next week or so. And I'd love to have you come along. So when we talk about the tax policy element of this, that they can hear, your passion and why it's so important, so that we can sensitize them, because they really play such a huge role in terms of communicating to not only businesses, but individuals. And so I think we really want to work to bring them on board and recognize how vital this really is, both for, families, for individuals, for these communities that serve our children, and also, even for the small businesses who, if their employees cannot be secure and knowing that their kids are in safe facilities that can take care of them, they're not going to be as productive of employees. So if you don't mind, I'd love to have you join us.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone else before we move on? All right. Well, thank you so much for, thanks so much for the big overview, Nadia. Now we're going to transition to a little bit of an update around our preschool development grant work, and I'll invite Erin Arango Escalante to kick us off, and then really pleased and proud to have my friend and colleague Sheila Briggs here as well, to provide a little bit of a vantage into what our partner agency on PDG is doing in this space. So thank you, Dr. Briggs, for being here with us today.
All right. So I can say this is an exciting topic. Governor Evers, you talk about connecting the dots and having it stick for you. Well, it has stuck for the preschool development grant. And in fact, that's the title of our grant, Connecting the Dots for Wisconsin's Kids. It really is. And that's the purpose of this grant and of the important work that we are doing. So I want to say in 2020, Wisconsin received a $10 million planning grant. The focus of this grant was to create an initial needs assessment and strategic plan that we've released. The strategic plan has become our roadmap for really how are we going to move the needle in thinking about access, affordability, quality in workforce in order to promote and advance equity and inclusion. We received a no-cost extension to continue this work, and we received as Secretary Amundsen said, a $30 million grant over the next 3 years. And so if you flip to the next slide, you'll see our goal for the preschool development grant, that by 2023, all of our Wisconsin families will have access to quality, affordable, local early care and education opportunities that meet the unique needs of families. And it's critical that we think about all Wisconsin families and having access, especially where there are childcare deserts, where there are there are children with disabilities, there are multilingual learners everywhere. We need to support all of those vulnerable populations, and we are going to do so by 2023. If you look at this next slide, this slide represents a couple of things. One, we have a number of early care and education programs that we know that are touching the lives of young children and families. We have our friends from the Department of Public Instruction, and they oversee our 4-year-old kindergarten, our 3-year-old kindergarten, our Title I preschools, early childhood special education. But we also have our folks from DHS who oversee our Part C, our early intervention, our birth to 3 programs, and then of course, childcare, Head Start, and early Head Start. Those are the core programs that we look at who are touching really the lives of young children. There are many more. And those others are really our mixed delivery system of supports and services. Everything from home visiting to institutions of higher education. I could go on and on and on. But while you are here, and I think one of the most important pieces is connecting the dots, is you are all partners in our birth to 5 early childhood state system. It takes all of us to be able to move the needle in access, affordability, quality, and workforce to promote and advance equity and inclusion. We know that everybody here, every agency that you represent will need to participate in this lift. If you think about it, connecting the dots is so key. We know that there are transportation issues, housing issues, economic development, workforce development, corrections. There are so many reasons why each and every one of you are at the table, and our preschool development grant highlights the need to have everybody here and to look at it from a high level perspective in order to support Wisconsin's youngest children and families. So with that, I want to just say a couple important things. I mentioned we need to look at all of these pillars: access, affordability, quality, and workforce in order to advance and promote equity and inclusion. Equity and inclusion is at the center of everything that we are doing. That is the one way we will be able to transform the work of our early care and education system, and quite frankly, connect it to the workforce, the economy, and beyond. So with that, I want to just share some things, and this was already discussed. We talked about the Governor's Advisory Council on Equity and Inclusion that is actually kicking off tomorrow, and the Health Equity Council. We are also looking and we are forming an Early Childhood Equity Advisory Council that will inform the work that we do in collaboration with those other councils to really be that feedback opportunity, that way to just continue to gather information and to share information from children and families to our early care and education programs to our mixed delivery system, which is really representative of our Governor's Early Childhood Advisory Council. And then you all, our birth through 5 ambassadors for our early childhood state system. Feedback has to go both ways, and you're going to see that happening. You're going to see the connections, the excitement, the synergy that is going to occur throughout. And so this is, one of many reasons why I'm so excited that Dr. Killings is here today to talk about this, to ground us in this framework and how we need to think about equity and inclusion and consider it in all of these different contexts and really connect the dots. When we think about equity and inclusion, and this is the next slide, I want to just make sure we're thinking about it from this perspective. And so this is adapted from our National Association of the Education in Young Children, or NAEYC. And I just want us to frame ourselves in thinking about equity, and that it exists when our families in the workforce experience culturally and linguistically responsive interactions that nurture their full range of social, emotional, cognitive, physical, and linguistic abilities that reflect and model fundamental principles of fairness, justice, and reduce inequity. Inclusion is the right of every infant and every young child in their family, regardless of ability, to participate in a broad range of activities and contexts as full members of families, communities, and society. This is what we are doing, and we're doing it together. And it's just a very exciting time. Let's look at the next slide. I talked about the key pillars of our strategic plan. And in our goal areas. And there are global strategies that we are looking at across, enterprise-wide across the state, both at the local, regional, and state levels. But in addition, we have specific goals and strategies that are related to workforce, access, affordability, and quality. And I will say that as we did our needs assessments and number of listening sessions across the state, we found that we needed to focus very intentionally on workforce now. That was a key lever in really looking at our early care and education system. And I want to say that the governor's proposed budget does just this. It looks at these areas. It looks at how do we recruit and retain talent while continuing to support access, affordability, and quality to advance equity and inclusion in our state. And so the alignment is there. The alignment from our strategic plan to our budget to the work that we are doing every day to the work that is happening at the local levels is aligned and we are ready for action. And quite frankly, we need all of you to be ready too, and I know you are. So that's what's so just exciting about all of this work. On our next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the how. And here's how I think, and this is just a very concrete example of how we are moving the needle at those local levels that are going to impact the work at the regional and the state levels. In December of 2020, we have launched community innovation grants. This is work that we are doing and encouraging folks at the local level to intentionally connect the dots, to begin to talk with those unusual allies that maybe aren't at the table, those businesses, those health agencies, housing folks, whatever it might be, to begin to form that collective impact model. And so we are working on innovation grants for this year, as well as workforce grants, because we know there's great work happening and we need to be able to create that sustainable system and infrastructure. And so throughout our preschool development grant in this year and beyond until 2023, you will see additional community innovation grants and workforce grants. And what we know is we want to gather your input, your feedback, and how we connect those dots in those areas, whether it's housing, corrections, transportation, economic development. I could go on and on and on and really talk from each of the perspectives that you all represent. We need to do this. And so we're going to need your input, your expertise, and advice. All this to say, yes.
Sorry, I just want to pause and hit an exclamation point on this program because I think that, you know, in the conversations that I've had with many of you on this Zoom meeting, you know, I often get calls from one of you with an out of the box idea, and it's sort of like an exciting opportunity. Maybe there's a business leader involved. Maybe it's, you know, a center expansion in an underserved part of the state. This is really what this is our answer to some of those calls that I've received and that I think we've all received from our partners in the last couple of years around, boy, we wish we could solve through this problem and we just can't seem to make this grant or this pot of federal money work for the needs that this community has. And so here, it's really that opportunity, again, to pull more people to the table. We're very inspired by that collective impact model. Frankly, what keeps me up at night, though, is a couple of things. One, that it's the usual players who are tapped into DCF communications who know about and apply and then are funded for community innovation grants. Nothing wrong with that. You know, great folks, great stakeholders, but I think in the effort to try to, number one, get out of the box thinking, number two, bring more different sectors and stakeholders to the table, we really could use your help in helping encourage those partners that pick up the phone and call you to say, ooh, I've got an opportunity for you. We had a relatively modest funding pot in our first year, but we really are going to, you know, prioritize this grant program as part of the next 3 years. So that's another hard ask from me, is just, if you've got a great idea, this could be the vehicle. And I want our stakeholders really tapped into that, you know, to that process, to this opportunity. Thanks, Erin.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. And things are going to look different. We all know this, right? They look different in one part of our state than the other. And so that collective impact model does look different. The needs of our families are different. And so wanting to be able to respond to those needs, those community needs, and make sure that we are really thinking strategically about this work. I also want to say that we could not do this work without the Department of Public Instruction, and they've been doing a lot of work around equity. And so I do want to now have Sheila Briggs talk a little bit more about the work that they are doing at DPI.
Thank you so much. I just have to say that our partnership and our work with DCF is some of the most important and joyful work that we do. So I feel so honored to spend so much of my time partnering on these important initiatives. And so thank you so much to Erin and Emily for your leadership. It's just been incredible to be able to be a strong partner with this important work. So thank you so much, and thrilled to be here. At the department, equity is at the center of everything we do. We're grateful for Governor Evers for his leadership that put us on this path when he was the state superintendent, and for Carolyn Stanford Taylor for continuing that charge. Recently, we put together a document just in the 5 teams in my division, and it was 8 pages of dot points of work that we're doing to try and enact the vision of equity at the department, and super proud of that work. And so today, I'm going to highlight just a couple things that are very specifically focused to early childhood, but know that this work rests within a larger body of work that also impacts early childhood in everything that we do. These are just very specific early childhood efforts that I'll share with you. So the first is around the professional development that we provide to the field around early childhood. We have an annual conference. It's called Promoting Early Childhood. And so just wanted to highlight that we have had a deep focus on equity and anti-bias curriculum in this conference for the last 3 years. And so certainly there was some, equity woven in, but this has been a very direct focus on anti-bias and anti-racism in the curriculum work. And so we've had keynote addresses and breakout sessions really focused on this, speakers that included Julie Olson Edwards, the co-author of Anti-Biased Education for Young Children and Ourselves, Dr. Rachel White, Associate Professor of Psychology, Hamilton, New York, Susan McDonald, the founder of Inspiring New Perspectives. And I just want to give a shout out to Tamara Mao, the director of the teaching and learning team at the department. She is just a voracious champion of this work, and just does an incredible job of really pushing on the systems that perpetuate inequities. And I am so unbelievably grateful for her leadership in many areas, but also in early childhood. And so that we've made great progress there under her leadership. Second, I would say very specific to the preschool development grant, we wrote in grant awards for the 11 tribal nations of Wisconsin to really focus on revitalizing the linguistic and cultural components of Wisconsin tribal nations. So working to address the needs of tribal communities, keep their language alive, improve transitions to elementary school, therefore reducing opportunity and achievement gaps, and really working to improve academic outcomes. So grateful, again, for the teaching and learning team, David O'Connor and his incredible leadership in this area, in partnership with, Sherry Kimball, who leads our early childhood work. And of course, DCF, as we work to keep our tribal nations alive. There's also a specific piece around culturally responsive tribal early childhood work that we've been doing. And so this has been a really beautiful joint effort with our tribes, where we've been, holding strategic planning meetings. We've developed and worked with our tribes on a webinar lecture series, holding symposiums to really focus on this work, and then Act 31 implementation around American Indian Studies training. So we've been doing that for years, but continue to do that with a special focus on preschool and early childhood. And then finally, I would say we have a strong partnership with the Center for Research for Early Childhood Education at UW-Madison that has really bolstered efforts across the state in really focusing on early childhood and equity there, and how critically important it is to really focus in this area, as we're preparing our youngest students, because the vision there is to promote equal opportunity for all young children ages birth through 8 years. And so we have found them to be incredible partners with us at DPI. And so those are just a few of the things that we're doing that is focusing very specifically on early childhood. And again, just thanks so much for the opportunity and for the strong partnerships. It's some of our most important work.
Thanks a lot, Sheila. Appreciate you and everything that you do over there. And nice shout out to Tamara as well. Appreciate that. So Missy, I see you've got a question in the chat around the timing. Is there timing established for the next grant cycle? The short answer is we're still working on what the right sequencing is in terms of timing. We just awarded this round actually in January, the round that closed in December. And that funding, I think, Erin, I'm watching your head here. I think it'll go through like October or something like that. Yes.
Yeah, that's just
Okay.
about right. Yep.
Okay.
So yeah,
great.
we're looking to launch the workforce grant in late spring 2021, which means we really need to come together to talk about that collaborative effort prior to announcing those workforce grants. They are on an annual basis with the ability to then renew annually for 3 years.
Thanks, Erin. And we will absolutely let this council know when those are coming so that we can really galvanize around the opportunity there. But I think just for folks to have a working understanding that there is this flexible, relatively flexible funding, it's just, we feel so, sometimes feel so constrained by the different rules and regulations around federal funding. And this grant funding happens to be, a really fertile place for some of the innovations that I think folks have had on their mind. So we're really, really excited about this. We're excited about being able to test some strategies and to be able to fund things through this pot of money that we wouldn't typically be able to do. So we'll keep you posted on that, but very excited about the collective impact possibilities there. So thank you, Erin. Thank you, Sheila. And now I want to transition. Everybody take a big stretch. We've been sitting here for an hour, and forewarning, we promised Dr. Killen Stewart that this was a participatory and chatty group. And so I'm hoping that folks don't prove me wrong in this conversation. I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing, and I hope that this first hour has been instructive. The second hour is really about helping us understand kind of like what our role is as systems leaders and what our role can be if those systems start to talk to one another, if those systems start to really articulate through that equity lens what our charge and purpose is and what our shared charge and purpose is. And that's why I'm so excited to introduce a national leader in this work, Dr. Sherry Killen Stewart. Dr. Stewart is the Director of Systems Alignment and Integration at BUILD. And BUILD is an entity that really well respected in the field. We work with them a lot. In her work with BUILD, she works directly with state leaders to advance early childhood systems, efforts in health, early learning, and in family support. She leads work to define and create intentional practices regarding equity in early childhood systems, policy, and leadership within the work of the BUILD initiative. So really very, very hand in glove for what we've been talking about today. Her equity work includes co-leading a network of early childhood leaders to advance racial equity and working with states and organizations across the country. She's also sort of one of us as state agency folks. Dr. Killen Stewart was the former commissioner of early education and care for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Vice President of Human Development and Operations at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and the CEO of Empower New Haven. Dr. Killen Stewart holds a nursing degree from University of Pittsburgh, a master's in administrative science from Johns Hopkins University, and a doctorate in counseling psychology from the University of Sarasota. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Killens. We really appreciate your time, and we are excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much. I feel really honored to be here and excited about the platform that you're building on, beginning with the governor. Let's see. Beginning with the governor's comment and his investment that you have so much to build from. You really have a strong platform, and then you have all the right leaders in the room, and so that's exciting. And I hope what I'm able to do in this presentation is to offer a framework to you all as leaders, to spend a quick minute on the why, and that point's been made several times, that you can go deep around PDG, you can be concerned about workforce and access and affordability, but these are citizens of your state that have a broader set of concerns, and so we must be working across multiple angles to do that. It was already mentioned that Bill works across the country and tailors technical assistance to meet the needs of state leaders so that state leaders are able to advance their work. We really do this in partnership, and actually we're better because of what we learn from state leaders. Today with you, we want to lay out a framework. We really want to talk about how you integrate equity as a verb, and you've got some great frameworks, this opportunity of these small grants that you can think about and do together, the data that's been pulled around PDG that helps you understand the multiple sectors, the quotes I love. I always say quotes, not notes, that I encourage each of you to read and think about where your service, your program, your state-funded opportunity shows up, and then to be guided by that information, that we not see that as a single person thinking and talking, but recognize that it represents multiple voices. A lot of times when we talk about equity, we already have made some decisions. And so I want to encourage you to look for what challenges you're thinking as I go through and talk. Come as a learner, not an expert. I've actually spent time the last few years learning more about the American Indian community or Native American community, because it depends on who you're talking to, how they refer to be referenced. We want to think and make meaning together, and we want to really believe that we can have a better future. Beginning with the framework, I think it's important to sort out that people often get excited about diversity, but diversity is about people and perspectives. We want to hire more diverse individuals, but often those folks are not included. We feel good about having them in the room, but their voice, our organizational culture remains. And so inclusion is also important, that we are connecting with people who are diverse, but we're also including their voice. But what we're going to focus on today, and what you have begun a work on, is around equity. How do we really get different set of results for populations? How do we shift our policy practice and our position so that we get the changes that we want? And I often begin with this. It comes from a video called Cracking the Code, which is a series of stories from people from diverse backgrounds, white, Black, Native American, immigrant. And the way the movie separates it is it says, look, there are things that have to be worked on that are internal to people. Bias, which was just mentioned, our own privilege and what we can do versus what others can do. And then there are things inside of people because they've lived in been socialized in an environment that has created ways that they think about themselves. But what I want to focus on, and what you've been focusing on, is the external. How can we get to know the situatedness of people different than ourselves, the people that we say we want to benefit? That's interpersonal. How do we shift our institutional policies so that we are more inclusive and getting greater benefit? And then finally recognizing that we can have the best early childhood system we want, but if folks are not housed, if folks are not fed, if they do not have employment that gives them a living wage, if they do not have access to healthcare, which we've seen in this environment, those structures matter. And all of that's tied together by decisions that each of us in this room makes, and the money, and that people represent with multiple identities. And so when you layer African American on gender, on background, those things also start to make a difference. And all of it's built in our history. When I talk about moving forward towards equity, I want to see increased opportunities for children and the adults who care for them. And this is sometimes tough because it's easier to say, let's do this for the children. But we recognize that if we're not creating opportunities for the adults around the children, the workforce that's been mentioned, the parents who care for those children, other adults in the community, we won't succeed. We need to remove barriers to those opportunities. Often we create opportunities and say, well, they're available, but we need to listen to families to understand what those barriers are to them accessing those opportunities. We need to distribute resources in a way that remove and don't exacerbate inequities. I think it was mentioned in this call that, you know, grants go out and the people who have on our email list, they come in and they get the grants. I have a story from being in Massachusetts where a parent in a rural community said, you know, you put out those grants as commissioner, but the rural communities never get them. Well, the state was using a scoring system, and based on that scoring system, they were usually not in the top scores. And what we did was do a grant that just went to the rural communities. And all of a sudden, we had all these rural applicants, and we learned from that process how to weight the applications coming in when they were competing against the other cities in a way that gave rural communities more access. And so I really want to encourage you to think about those places that don't have infrastructure. It'll cost a little bit more, it'll take a little bit more time, but that's the way to go in, that many of the areas that you want to impact are the areas without infrastructure, without institutional partners. And then finally, we want to put mechanisms in place to make sure we're getting the results we want. So often folks at states do equity grants, they put it out and we feel good about that for the moment. But then when the 2 years passed or the 1 year passed and we say, well, who really benefited? We're really not able to measure that against the children and families we began by being concerned about. I encourage you to think about your why. I just pulled a few articles about Wisconsin, again, to situate this idea of the preschool development grant, the idea of young children and families in a much larger context. And so this talks about home ownership and African Americans. We know that when people have stable housing, whether through home ownership or rental, they stay connected to their early learning and care programs. You saw the video on suspension and expulsion. Some of that is about relationship between teachers and families and communities. And so being able to have stable housing does make a difference. We know the landscape has changed for childcare. You heard some great opportunities that your state is trying to do to try to stabilize that environment. But it's also an opportunity to think about the childcare deserts, which are mentioned in your preschool development grant, and why isn't childcare there, and how is this an opportunity to build those opportunities? We've seen the disparities in health across the Black and Latino population in COVID that goes back to public health opportunities that links to health care. Again, if we want a strong workforce, if we want strong children going to childcare, then we need to be caring about a larger context of health. And so how do we situate the idea of the family and then make sure that all of us are working to have the supports that are necessary? Here's another one on housing, childcare shortages, and looking at rural communities, which we know is a very different situation. And so how do the rules and regulations that we create at the state make it untenable for communities to participate? And I thought this one was interesting about the state and the tribes having a choice about where they would get their vaccines, and the choice that some of the tribes in Wisconsin made. And how do we understand and go back and do a case study on that to see how do we partner with them in the future? The point of all these articles and the point of some of what I'm about to say is that where people live matters, the opportunities that are available. And often when we sit at the state level, we're not really thinking about where do we need to tailor. It's not just that those communities don't participate. We need to understand why they're not participating. And it often means additional investment of time, resources, patience in order to have them participate. But access to preschool, access to infant toddler care is tied with a multitude of issues around maternal and infant well-being, around nutrition, around secondary education as we think about a qualified staff, around child welfare and child welfare involvement. And so I love this quote that says, you know, if you come to save me, if you're sitting at this table, I'd say, because the secretary asked you, and I really appreciate her asking me to be here, that's probably not the right angle. I encourage you to be looking for, okay, this is a population of children and families. How can I participate and advance my own work, my own shared concerns? So I didn't know, Secretary, if we wanted to stop here and have a brief conversation about what people were thinking about their why, what's important to them about being at the table.
Yeah, that sounds great. If we want to take a pause, please, I invite people to come off mute. And again, if you're here as a surrogate for an agency head, please know that your voice is absolutely valued. I'd love to hear from you.
Any thoughts? You can also use the chat because we can imagine read that, but happy to have you share any thoughts about what you hope to get out of participating in this work.
Good morning, everyone. This is Mainza. I'll share a little bit. So I'm with the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. You know, I think our why at WIDA in terms of investing in our young children and being a part of this leadership council is all about, for us, of course, we do housing, affordable housing, but it's about the ecosystem and how all of us are interconnected and how do we create those economic mobility opportunities for underserved communities. Because to your point, the point that has been made numerous times throughout this morning's meeting already, you know, if our families, our parents don't have the economic mobility, how can they continue to raise healthy, thriving children? And so for us, again, in the housing space and economic development space, it's about how do we help create that ecosystem where we do come together to make sure that our communities, our diverse communities, especially too, are being supported. And it's also about how do we help to start creating wealth? Because again, that's part of this whole system that our families operate in. It's the financial, their economic situations, the schooling, but all of that comes back to our young children. And so really for us in housing, it's knowing that we are a part of the social determinant of health, and where we can help to continue to connect those dots and be part of that ecosystem. That's what we're here for here at WIDA.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Hi, this is Kathy Blumenfeld. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Financial Institutions, and thank you for this opportunity to be here today. The work that you are doing is amazing. And in the spirit of connecting the dots and building out what Mainza just said, at the Department of Financial Institutions, we house the Office of Financial Literacy and Capability and have recently expanded our focus on financial inclusion. And I think that's a huge component to building wealth and building financial literacy, financial capability, and ensuring that families have access to financial services that will help them grow and sustain and better their families' outcomes in the future. So we see lots of connective tissue between the work that you're doing and the way that our financial institutions can also be supportive. Oftentimes they are pillars in the community and can really work to support the work that's being done here today. So thank you for that opportunity.
No, thank you so much. And on both of those angles, there's some great policies around stabilizing families after families have new babies and prevention of eviction. There are great things about baby bonds, which have been connected to children going on to higher ed. So both of those are great examples of the work and what we're trying to accomplish together. And so,
Oh, I was just going to say, in Governor Evers' budget too, he did also propose, and we'll be looking into creating children's savings accounts, which are, so connecting those dots, as well as ABLE accounts, which will help people and families with children with disabilities. And so that's another tool to help support families in this effort. So thank you.
Exactly. And we'll talk when we get to the data about, well, how do you lean in and make sure that the housing is stable and they've got the savings accounts and it's really building economic mobility as was described for a specific set of children and families that have experienced exclusion. I took this slide from your own PowerPoint around the preschool development grant and how you were thinking about equity and inclusion to really be transformational and removing some of the system of bias and racism and inequality in programs and practices. And you've got lots of data that have looked at your regions to help you understand where to begin and go. So we'll continue to talk about that. In our work, we think about 5 things and they're not linear, which is why action is in the middle. It's really you're continuously doing these steps. But I want to go through and talk about understanding root causes, data to plan, monitor, and decide, both qualitative data, the numbers, but also what people are saying, the qualitative data. And so proud that you've already gotten some quotes to be able to drive your thinking. Our own abilities to take action together and individually, the importance of working with people, programs, and structures, which was just demonstrated by the 2 speakers, and then our own roles, responsibilities, influence as leaders. So root causes, race is a social construction. It doesn't have any biological significance. That's a different lecture, but if you want readings on it, I'm happy to share. And the reason Black, American Indian, Latinx, and some other populations are in the place they're in is because of historical disenfranchisement. And I'm going to show you a couple articles towards the end that help you kind of track that history. So we've had a legacy of creating policies that were exclusionary, that led to poverty, segregation, and barriers to opportunities. And these things are interlocking. And that's why this council is so important, because you got at the table people who represent childcare and people who represent housing and hopefully criminal justice and employment, because all of these things work in partnership with each other. You can do really well in early childhood, in early learning, but if the father or there's a criminal justice issue, or if the family fears, as some do, fear home visiting because they've had a history of being involved with child welfare, then having those opportunities aren't seen as real opportunities. When we think about taking action, for us, it happens at 4 levels. 1 is personal. We encourage you to read, and I've suggested a couple of topics to really understand our own bias, and we all have it, to think about John Powell's work around othering and exclusion, and work towards belonging and inclusion. That's at the personal level, working through our own values and beliefs and our own set of privileges. We also encourage you, and you've begun this, to begin relationships in the very places with children and families that you seek to benefit, to understand their story, to start with what are your goals for your children and families. One recent example in some museum and library work I'm doing, we were talking to families and trying to understand why they didn't see children's museums or library museums as resources. And they started out saying, look, on Saturday, all I could do is get the laundry done, get the grocery shopping done. There's no time to go to just a museum. But as you talk to them, they said, but I care about my kid's socialization, and I care about my child's ability to write. And so if museums or libraries structured an opportunity that was time limited, that was linked to the early learning standards in that state, that was linked to what families said they wanted their kids to know and be able to do, that might be something to put in the schedule. But when it looked like just an open space and one more place to go, and they didn't link it to meeting their children's goals, they weren't interested. So this idea of listening to families so that we understand their strength and their perspective is critically important. And then this is the big win for you all as a council, us as state leaders, is that we've got to shift our institutional policies and practices, and we've got to work together so that I shift and you shift, and there's a benefit for the populations that we say we're working toward. Lots of opportunities to act. I encourage you to read this article, Curb Cut, if you haven't. It talks about the history of why there are curb cuts in sidewalks. You think it was so that people who are able-bodied but using a wheelchair could get up, but all of us use those curb cuts now. If you've got groceries, if you've got kids in strollers, and so that when you do things for a particular population, it has a ripple effect. If you're interested in the history around African American, this is a great article that runs through education and policy and health and criminal justice. And it looks at a whole range of issues in the policies that put us in this place and encourages us to rewrite those particular rules. And then this is an article about federal and tribal relationship and policy. And it actually in the article lists policies as well, but it goes back to the 1700s to current and shows the differing relationships that we've had with tribes, that the country has moved from a removal idea to a reservation idea to an assimilation. You know, we're now at self-government and trust, but it's very fragile because this is not multiple generations. The people who we are talking to now that are part of sovereign tribal governments have also lived through many of these decisions. In fact, I was talking to a tribe just this week who experienced childcare as similar to boarding schools when the childcare does not speak the language of the tribe. And we aren't working to make sure that we're preserving their language, that we're asking children to come in and only speak English. You all are leaders, and so understanding this historical legacy and current reality is in that personal bucket. I'm really trying to encourage you to act and find strategies and best practices, and you're certainly on the road to do that, to really disrupt the systemic inequities so we can build a great childcare center. But if we're not working with transportation to make sure we're building it in a way that people can get to it, then that ends up being a structural barrier to individuals accessing that opportunity. Or we can do, as I've seen in a state, we can build a great big childcare center without recognizing all the family childcare that was an economic, robust community. And then we build free childcare center and we disrupt the economic cycle of the community without thinking about those other families. And we as leaders need to intentionally be listening to the experiences and perspectives of those most impacted by policy. So I say you should always be asking yourself, and this is sometimes hard because we have lots of work to do and we're up late with those who show up, but who's benefiting and who's not benefiting from the policies, and what efforts do I take to intentionally and consistently reach out? And even in COVID, I've still been doing family focus group, workforce focus groups through Zoom and other methods. I always say if you want to visit when COVID is resolved, we should go at least an hour from the office because that's usually outside of your social network. And how are you really engaging those farthest from opportunity and giving you data and understanding the data so that you have a set of shared goals and opportunities? And when we say take action, and thank you, Governor, for the opportunity of new money, but I encourage you to be looking within the resources you have already, because those universal resources are available to these families. And so I ask you to consider, how can I interpret policy in a way that's more flexible, that meets a rural community, meets a tribal community, or meets the needs of an African-American community? How can I modify policy? How can I modify the practices where things are delivered, how we monitor? And how can I work for the workforce? Because the other thing is that we get it right at the state level, the leaders come together and we agree, and we don't get to the front line. And so then we hear experiences of poor quality. And it is a true experience that I went into a community and said, oh, I just don't want to go to that gray building anymore because the people treat me poorly. And what I discovered as we listened several times was that they had stopped assigning one worker to the family. They were using a basket strategy. And so each time you showed up, the person only dealt with the thing that was in front of you and broke the relationship, which in this community created lots of tension and lots of going back and forth. And when you talk to staff, they didn't like it either, but for some reason they had shifted their practice of having one worker assigned to one family to really help the family get through. So we're not asking you to only address racial or other inequities exclusively, but it is important that it's at top of mind. We are asking you to think about the impacts rather than your intention. So your intention is to give those grants to communities to make sure that they are more inclusive and do things that advance equity. But how will we measure the impacts? How will people think about what they really do? Are more Black and brown, tribal, other communities really being included? To focus on structural and institutional. So often we say, well, if the person would get a college degree, well, that's at the personal level. And if you're Black or African American, the pathway to get a college degree isn't necessarily 5 years, especially if you're 35, 45, which most of your early child care workforce is, and accessing a college environment in the multiple departments. So that's really a structural issue. It's not just the personal commitment, it's also managing the structure. And then of course, make equity an ongoing priority, which I certainly see. And so I didn't know if any of you had policies or practices that you're thinking about that are universal, that you might want to share a story that you might want to tailor to meet the needs of infants and toddlers or families as we're doing the work. I'm going to pause here again. Anybody have an example? Kathy, you're lit up, but.
So this is Danielle Williams. I'm the Assistant Deputy Secretary at the Department of Workforce Development. One of the really exciting provisions of the governor's budget this year is a new pilot program for the department where we can have staff really go into a community-based settings where we know that families are already engaged. And rather than asking them to come to our job centers or our government buildings, get to know the families there, work with the local nonprofits and see, okay, what is it that you really need to help advance in your career? And some of that might be childcare, some of that might be transportation, but the idea is to really have that personal navigator for folks, especially to help with the working poor who might be working 2-3 jobs at a time and trying to balance all of that. They don't have the time or energy to navigate all of our bureaucratic systems. So here's one person who can just help do all of that for them. And so that's one of the things we're really excited for in this budget and hope will move forward.
Yeah, thank you. That is a fabulous example. And I encourage you, hopefully we're hopeful with the budget, but if you did that one day a week, one day a month, somebody was able to go out, that would also, be an added value. But the idea is right. Let's go where people are. Let's go where people are already based on their strength, working and caring for their families, and then think with them and help them navigate the multiple services. That's fabulous. It'd be great if one of your partner agencies would go out with you, and then your staff wouldn't have to be the only one to have the right answers or the thoughts about how to move forward.
That's great. Thank you.
And hi, this is Karen Timberlake. I'm the interim secretary at the Department of Health Services. I'll just hop in with a couple of examples as well. Governor's budget is great for kids in a wide variety of ways, including some program areas that we have responsibility for here at DHS. So the governor's budget includes a major investment in prevention and also treatment for children who have been exposed to lead and have elevated blood lead levels. So I think it's really important that we're investing on both sides of that coin, right? Both the prevention side and the early intervention side. Also really excited to see a package of proposals around protecting young kids and young adults from tobacco and vaping and other tobacco products, raising the purchase age up to 21 for all of those things, which is long overdue. And in addition, we know we still have numbers of children and young adults who have physical, emotional, and developmental delays or disabilities on a waiting list for long-term services and supports. And the governor's budget as proposed would eliminate that waiting list and make those services available to all kids and young adults. So really an exciting package of policy and programmatic changes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Health is so important, and the impacts on families of having children who need those supports is the other side of that coin. So appreciate those examples, but really do encourage you to look in what's already available, because this comes from transforming the workforce. But this is the maze, to speak to the first example, that families have to deal with. So you have a young child, there are multiple practitioners in many settings, there are lots of support organizations and roles. Love the idea of labor going where children and families already are, and then thinking about with your partners how to make those connections. You know, we can't reduce inequities as a single leader alone. Inequities are intersecting and they're structural as well as in our institutions. When we go and listen to families, we listen with different ears. And so going with a partner from another agency allows us to hear what they're saying in a different way. There are multiple approaches to tackling the same challenge, both from the perspective of families and the perspective of agencies. So your different expertise and experiences matters. And policies can be created, but implementation really needs to be tailored to those specific places. So again, Governor, appreciate all the opportunities in the budget, but if we're not careful when it gets to the ground, it what may not benefit the families that we're talking about. You all have great.
Sherry, sorry, can I just jump in for 1 second, kind of on your last point? I think just on this sort of like cross-sector leadership, or like hearing with different ears in conversations, I thought that was a really interesting point. And just kind of want to spotlight this idea that the listening sessions that the governor has done in advance of both budgets that he's submitted, obviously this last round virtual budget listening sessions, which I'm really curious, you know, I don't know, Governor, if somebody in the office is sort of like looking at it from a data perspective of like, were we successful in getting different kinds of folks from different kinds of communities, better in the virtual space, better in the in-person space, but also just the visibility that it gives to the budget items that have come out, you know, to say, and you know, your speech the other night obviously like tied individual ideas that people had in those listening sessions to budget items that you were presenting. And I thought that was really powerful, from just making the work visible, understanding how that feedback loop informs policy, and people, you know, understanding and having hope that when, you know, when we go out and listen, that actually means something to informing the process. On the new ears thing, like I had the privilege of sitting in the criminal justice listening session, the criminal justice focused listening session. And what I heard was a whole bunch of people who wanted to talk about prevention and early childhood and K-12. And I don't know if that was just, you know, my lens on what I was hearing, but I just couldn't believe how many people came to a criminal justice session to advocate for prevention and education, and it was so cool. And so just think, like, hearing and understanding that the people who live in this state are making those connections, and the opportunity we have to make those kinds of stories visible. And I think you've done a really good job of that in connecting kind of those listening sessions to the budget.
Yeah, and the early childhood world is pretty well organized too. And Dr. Keelans, I just want to, I know you're going to go further on this, but just give you, you know, I think you've heard some things that are going right in our state, but, you know, we're right in the middle of this pandemic here. And I'll just tell you, one of the things that keeps me awake at night is our ability or inability to get vaccines in the arms of Black and Brown and Indigenous people. And, you know, we're dealing with historical issues around around vaccines, frankly. But we're also dealing with trust issues and all sorts of other things. And, you know, we will get it right at the end of the day. We will get people inoculated and safe. And you know, this isn't necessarily a early childhood issue, but it's around diversity and our state and being inclusive. It's going to be messy, and I just hope we learn something from it. That's, you know, and I think we can use some of the learnings that we have around the table here today to help us find ways to crack that barrier. But in the meantime, people are going to die, and unless we get it right, unless we, you know, get it right well, we as a state, we will have once again failed. And obviously that's enough to keep anybody at night, right? But you know, we think we have it. You know, we get good ideas from Washington. We get good ideas from people sitting around this room. But it is such a multi-faceted issue, dealing in history, dealing with the fact that you know, the healthcare world and the real lives of people, especially people of color, isn't necessarily interconnected in a way that you can just say, well, this person goes to this clinic, then this clinic is going to take care of their needs because they trust that clinic, and away we go. We get shots in those arms that way. It is so complex that we're going to need help from the people that are on the screen, actually, frankly, to help us make that happen. So I know we were talking about all the good things that are happening. I can tell you that this is one thing that keeps me awake at night.
Yes, Governor. And I think a couple of points have been made. I mean, Danielle's, I think, idea around going to trusted people already in the community is going to be a good one. We've seen mistakes across the country in states where they hire up a whole institution to do the shots, but it's not somebody familiar or a part of the community. What you just mentioned about linking it to healthcare, I think that's been another misstep, is that we've separated somehow COVID screening and testing and immunization from access to healthcare. So people who don't have everyday access to healthcare, and you say, show up over here just to get a shot, it reinforces some of the trauma and the fear. The article that I mentioned about the Native American community and them getting the shots and giving the shots meant they were building on trust. So I do think it's about some of the work you're already doing, but it is about getting the connections with those communities and sustaining that as a way to build from. And maybe not having it be just about the shot, but about access to employment, about access to food security, about access to stable housing, because all those things are also on families' minds at this point. And where the injection maybe was nationally prevalent, if you're 6 months in arrears on your rent, that's what's prevalent for you in your mind. Data is important, and you have lots of data. We showed this one because Native American Indians show up. This comes from the Bureau of US Census, showing the population of young children in Wisconsin. This one, the Native American population did not show up, and so I showed you the 0 to 18. But I love these indexes that look at things across multiple angles, and your PDG did a lot of this as well. But this is from the Annie E. Casey Foundation. It just shows you that the Native American population versus other populations are not doing well when you look at it on multiple indexes. And that's what equity is. Equity is we could get it right in our program, but we've got to be biting pieces of this elephant from different sides if we're going to make a change. The other way to look at it is the county health rankings, because I encourage you to find, and 10 is just an arbitrary number, but find the 10 places in your state where people are not having benefit or not having access, and go there and understand what flexibilities, what policies, what practices, what infrastructure is in the way. or not available, and build from there, and it'll have a ripple effect across your state. So often when we're working with states, we say, let's start by looking at the top 10 places with either large numbers of children, modified so you pick up rural, not accessing services. I would go to the places where people aren't taking the immunization and hang out in places in that community to understand what their thinking is. So data is quantitative and qualitative. It's the numbers and the stories. We really need to be hearing from those we're benefiting and those we're not benefiting. And equity takes time. I always say speed is the enemy of equity. And so while we might want to do immunizations and we want to do so many per month, having a process to build a relationship, clearly important with our tribal communities is important. Understanding what their concerns are about root causes, because one concern might be, if I take that immunization and I have a side effect, who do I call? Where do I go if I get that in a CVS situation? Not to remark on CVS, but that I'm not a part of a larger healthcare system, and I may have had other healthcare issues that weren't resolved. Uncover strategies or actions to address those root causes. I remember a project where a state was trying to get the immunization rate up for infants. And when they went into the community where the moms were not taking advantage of the immunizations, what they discovered was a street light was out. And the moms kept saying, yeah, but my kid's going to get killed on their bike out here on these streets. And so until it's not all state responsibility, we could work at the local level, get the street light fixed. They weren't willing to talk about immunizations. And so the root cause that comes from the family may not be the thing right in front of you. And then, as we've said, monitor the impact of those strategies for intended and unintended benefits. Your work is admirable around connecting to the community, but I hope you see it as a feedback loop, that there's a range of beneficiaries, children, families, the workforce, community leaders. And we want to connect because when we get to the state, we are often far from those we really want to benefit. And we need those lived experiences so that we can design. We can be driven by our own passion. We can be driven by the stories we had when we were in the field, but our own social networks are often not diverse enough for us to act now. So we listen and learn from families, what are their own goals. We develop experiences with populations so that we understand the root causes and create those partnerships that address those. We want to understand what they're doing to survive, how they're managing. As I talk to families through COVID, how some of them have chosen, when they've got too many children in the house, to keep the internet going, how some send some to one place, some to another. So people are thriving and have lots of strengths to build on. And we need to understand that story. And then we need to take what we learn and apply it to our practice, intentionally building feedback loops, because what we hear the first time is the tip of the story. As we have a cycle of improvement over time, we clarify their interests, we clarify our ability to act, and we always want to be honest with them about what timelines might be. As we go as a cross-sector team, we'll have opportunities and levers at different points. These are quotes from your own work. We don't qualify for childcare assistance because our careers, we make too much money, but it's just enough money to pay for childcare. And so how do you think about wages across the board for individuals with young children? This one about single parents, you see single parents or families from low income, they're really struggling. They're really struggling to make payments because they have to balance between, if I pay for my children, am I going to starve tonight? So really looking at income and wages, and love Danielle's example about helping people move up. There's other quote here about the process makes me feel disrespected. So thinking about single points of contact and what are we doing with frontline workers, and how are we doing supervision? The idea that elders can't come in the building because of background checks. Well, what is the flexibility there? Because in the tribal community, the elder is everything. The elder and the youth is everything. So if we've got a policy that prevents elders from coming into the building, how do we create that opportunity? What other protections can we put in place? And I'm near closing, but there are 4 things that you're going to hear from people that are going to prevent you or attempt to prevent you from leaning in and doing this work. One is that everybody's got equal opportunity, which really minimizes ongoing racial disenfranchisement and minimizes or denies the existence of policies that exclude. There are people who say it's a personal responsibility, which seeks to blame and doesn't look at the institutions and the structures and those things that have happened over time that give privileges to some and take it away from others. There are other things that, well, people chose to live in that rural community or they chose to live in that part of an urban community, which speaks to our privilege and our choice when we get to decide where we live in one community or another, one with opportunities, one without opportunities, based on our ability to choose. And then finally, there's this ideal of equality that, people get it when they earn it. Trust me, if you really take this work on, you're going to have a conversation with someone who's going to give you one of these frames, and you need to be ready to lean in and continue to be able to do the work. So leading with equity requires a deep commitment and our ability to communicate as we're doing here. It is both things out there and things inside of people, and we have to work with both of those. It's about sustaining relationships. We need to practice, fail, and practice again. And I hope you have success in your small grants, but I hope when we don't have success that we learn from that so that we move forward in a different way. There are plenty of tools and networks are really required. So other questions or conversation? And thank you, Governor, for all you're doing to really lean into young children and families. And thank you, Secretary, for your, making this a public conversation and having a way for all of your partners to show up and have a shared commitment and risk together. It is admirable. And I hope I could be your partner in moving that forward.
Thank you, Sherry. Great work. Great work.
Yeah, thank you so much for really, I think you created for us a presentation that gave us a mirror back to some of, the bright spots that we have, some of the assets that we have as a state, as a group. You also showed us some things that, that are our burden to bear, some data that is difficult to look at. And I know that as a cabinet, we grapple with this data a lot. And I'm really proud to sit at a table of folks that I know we can have a presentation like this because this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. This is the conversation that we have when we sit at tables together. And so just want to thank my colleagues for making those kinds of connections and doing this thinking. Any last comments or thoughts for Dr. Killen, Stewart, or just in general, how are people feeling at the end of 2 hours, really digging into this idea of what's your why? I love that question. What's your why? And where is equity in relationship to that why?
This is Linda Hall. I put mine in the chat. I mean, for us at the Office of Children's Mental Health, it's all about well-being of children. And children can't be well if they and their families are not being treated equitably. So this is front and center for us. And in terms of collaborating with people, we learned a lot when we collaborated with DCF and DPI to do some listening sessions in communities on early childhood. And I think that we were taken more seriously because we came together.
Thanks, Linda. Rebecca, did you come up?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Secretary Amundsen. Yeah, the why question is a great one from the Child Abuse Neglect Prevention Board and Celebrate Children Foundation. Again, we can't strengthen families without thinking about an equity lens for all families. And some of the work that we have started to do. I really liked the how do you integrate equity as a verb. We've done a number of surveys of parents through COVID on trying to get a measure on their stress level, how that's impacting their relationship with their child, what their needs are, and really working through, this network of family resource centers. So there is one place that you can go and learn about high quality childcare, jobs, housing, parenting skills, right? Some positive youth development and all of that. And we're going to have to do really focused listening sessions this summer. We're looking for a vendor right now because, the surveys, we mainly got Caucasian respondents, married or two income white households, and they're stressed. But that does not mean that we would hear the same from our First Nations and from other populations. So we have a series of 10 listening sessions scheduled out for this summer to have some one-on-one conversations with parents in other areas in the state.
Hey, Rebecca, that's such a great point. One of my practices is to find a nonprofit organization that serves the population that you're trying to reach and co-host the listening session with them who already have access. It does two things. One, it gives you access to that population, but it also gives them a place, because often people share stories in listening sessions and need support after. And so by partnering with a nonprofit in a specific community, you can get both and, because we should resist trying to answer questions for people when we're listening. Rather, we should stay in a listening mode and make sure their needs are met after.
Any last thoughts from folks who haven't yet had an opportunity to speak? Again, I'm always just so grateful for my friends like Kevin and Joel, who hang out with us for a few hours. I'm a teacher. I have no problem calling on people. So any thoughts from anyone we haven't heard from yet?
I'll spend just a second, Emily, and I appreciate the discussion. And what I'm sitting here thinking about too is the urgency of everything that we're doing. Starting on Monday, I'm going to have a call later on today. Wisconsin, as a state, we have about $400 million to address one of the most urgent needs in housing. And how are we going to do that? And I think we've had some success, but even in the way that we're doing that, that's one of the pillars on some of this more thoughtful, the work that we're trying to do over the longer term. The governor has done some things in addition to having this, the resources that we have right now. And I think there's pressure for us to be successful because it's people having the physical roof over their heads that depends on it. But the governor has done some things in his proposed budget to swing the pendulum back away from what has over the last decade been very much some changes that have been more towards the people who, not the renters, but those who have who own the properties, the landlords. And so, we're trying to make those structural changes, but all of what we're trying to do here and everything in the connecting the dots across childcare, it starts with not having that urgency of being out on the street and, all of those things. So I feel, it's a good pressure. We've got these urgencies and you're doing the same thing in childcare with the childcare counts programs. You have to get those things right in order for us to be able to get to some of these structural fundamental things. So, everything is building on itself. And I really appreciated being, just all of the discussion and everybody's input today.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the housing, Joel, and just the ability to be able to see it as part of the same conversation, I think is something really exciting that we're pushing into. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure if Missy's still on, but I think some of the work that Missy's been pushing all of us to do through her role at WEDC to be able to tell that story across our agencies has been really inspiring to me. So that it's just been a good, I would say a good push, and I think we're really well poised to keep pushing on all of this. So I want to say thank you for the time. 2 hours is a lot to ask of you, and I really appreciate it. I think that as we plan for our next meeting, we'll reach out. one of the things I do want to ask of you, so Sherry, one of her slides was sort of a provocation of asking, you know, how would we go about identifying 10 counties? What are the metrics? What are the indicators that you would use to answer Sherry's question around 10 counties that needed additional supports or additional resources in order to sort of thrive? I think like my metrics might be different than some of your metrics. And yet, if we started to see some of these metrics as part of the single story, as part of the same story, we could maybe unlock some really powerful ideas there. So I'm really inspired by that challenge from Sherry, and we'll be reaching out later in the spring to start to ask that question. So just a flag, we'll communicate early and often. We do want to thank Sherry for her willingness to share slides with us. So we are going to be able to share those slides. Thank you for those of you who asked for that. And then we will absolutely continue to communicate on these grant opportunities. And please feel free to do the same in the spirit of this kind of whole family approach. The Leadership Council on Early Years mailing list that we sort of own could absolutely be a place to share some of these opportunities across agencies that I think could have a real benefit. So a few action steps coming out of this meeting, but we appreciate your time and your attention, and hope everybody has a great day. Looking forward to seeing some of you again tomorrow. Take care, everyone.